Hello and welcome back everybody to another weekly energy and resource update video. As usual, we'll be going over data releases, news updates, any and all major developments having to do with energy and resources, oil, gas, mining, and minerals. So, if you are into knowing about such things, then subscribe and stick around because this is one of the channels for you. Now quickly before we get started, a note to my usual viewers. I will be gone for a period of time, at least in terms of regular content. I got invited by my family to go on a cruise, and obviously since there's no way I would to ever be able to afford such a thing myself, obviously since it was being offered for free, I said yes. So I will be gone for about the next week and a half, and either afterwards or during the cruise itself, depending on how good the ship's internet connection is, I will be uploading a thorough set of travel vlog videos as I usually do anytime I get to go somewhere. So those will either be uploaded day by day, or if the connection isn't strong enough while we're out at sea, then just in one massive multi-video dump when I get back to shore. So, starting down the usual list of weekly data, U.S. oil production has declined over the past 2 weeks, dropping from 12.3 back down to 12.1 million barrels per day. U.S. oil consumption has dropped as well, dropping down to just below 19.5 million barrels per day. Individual consumption numbers within that for this past week at least coming in at gasoline 9.15 million barrels per day, diesel fuel 4.09, jet fuel 1.77, and propane consumption as we're now in the warmer months now falling all the way down to only 500,000 barrels per day equivalent. Oil prices held relatively steady over the course of the week, fluctuating between $60 and $64 a barrel. U.S. natural gas production came in at 100.5 billion cubic feet per day. U.S. natural gas consumption held around 77 billion cubic feet per day, with the individual numbers within that being heating demand only coming in at 16.2, consumption by natural gas-fired power plants coming in at 24, amount exported on LNG tankers still going up, now up to 5.8, and consumption by the pipeline system for its own pumping fuel, 6. U.S. natural gas storage inventories are now up to 1.65 trillion in storage, compared to normally we would have about 1.94 by this time of the year, and last year, which was a high demand winter as well, we were still down at 1.52. And natural gas prices held relatively the same range they've been at for multiple weeks now. This week in particular holding between $2.55 and $2.70 per thousand cubic feet. We did have a new oil and gas discovery during these past 2 weeks, particularly another discovery offshore of Angola. This one estimated at about 250 million barrels, thus now putting the total amount of oil discovered this year in 2019 so far up to 4.75 billion barrels. All right, and thank you God, we have a massive set of data releases that all came out at the same time. So starting with our OPEC updates, Saudi Arabia has bumped back up just a tiny bit, from 9.79 up to 9.81 million barrels per day. Kuwait, after holding for several months at around 2.7 million barrels per day, has dropped a tiny bit below it, down to 2.69. The UAE is still holding at about 3.05 million barrels per day. Algeria is continuing on its terminal decline phase, losing a tiny bit each month, falling previously from 1.025 down to 1.023. Now this month down to 1.019. Angola bumped back up a little bit from 1.37 up to 1.39 million barrels per day. Ecuador continuing to lose production, though primarily to terminal decline sloping, as they've pretty much been ignoring the production cuts, dropping by tiny bits over the last few months from 533,000 down to 530, now down to 529,000 barrels per day. Iran, again because of the sanctions, continuing to drop in its output, formerly having dropped from 4 million barrels per day all the way down to 2.8, they've now dropped even further from 2.8 down to 2.5 million barrels per day. And Libya, after that sudden drop, has jumped back up now to 1.1 million barrels per day, but that whole renewed civil war thing obviously has the threat of major supply disruption potential kind of looming over Libya's head. And Venezuela, to no one's surprise, continues dropping. Having previously dropped all the way down to 728,000 barrels per day last month, well, they lost that extra 28,000 and are now down to a flat 700,000 barrels per day. And Nigeria rebounds a little bit, now back up to 1.78 million barrels per day. Iraq continues to hold at a steady 4.5 million barrels per day, complying with the OPEC production cut agreement, as they would otherwise be pumping about 5 million barrels per day right now. Now on to the grand list of international data. Azerbaijan had a little bit of an uptick, popping back up by a few thousand, up to 801,000 barrels per day. Australia, because of liquids production from several new natural gas fields that have been brought online off their northwestern coast, continues to climb upwards, now reaching 331,000 barrels per day. Brazil, after their sudden jump up, has now dropped back down suddenly, back down to 2.63 million barrels per day. Colombia continues climbing upwards, almost to 900,000 now, just below it at 899,000 barrels per day. The smaller Republic of the Congo continues to hold its oil production at 327,000 barrels per day, while neighboring nation Gabon continues to hold its oil production at its plateau of 200,000 barrels per day. Kazakhstan, after almost hitting 2 million barrels per day, has dropped a little bit down to 1.94 million barrels per day. The tiny West African nation of Ghana has seen a sudden upsurge as several new fields have come into production, now jumping up to 214,000 barrels per day. Indonesia continues to hold itself relatively between 750 and 800,000 barrels per day, this month in particular coming in at 772. Oman continues to hold a relative plateau, although starting to slip down a little bit, this month down to 970,000 barrels per day. Malaysia coming in at 656,000 barrels per day. Argentina still seeing some incremental increases in its shale oil production, allowing them now to actually reach 500,000 barrels per day again. Vietnam continues oscillating, although still gradually declining over time, this month coming in at 228,000 barrels per day. Thailand continues a very gradual decline over time as well, now down to 208,000 barrels per day. The Central Asian nation of Turkmenistan, after holding for months at 245,000 barrels per day, they have now slipped down to 217,000. Equatorial Guinea continues its terminal decline, although now holding at 151,000 barrels per day. The tiny Caribbean nation of Trinidad and Tobago has rebounded a little bit from 56 back up to 66,000 barrels per day. And oil production from the UK has over the last several years been swinging wildly all over the place, in a range between 800,000 and 1.1 million barrels per day. This month jumping upwards to just outside of that range actually, coming in at 1.115 million barrels per day. And Papua New Guinea continues to hold its plateau at 52,000 barrels per day. Now onto the U.S. shale field data, starting with the biggest player, of course, the Permian Shale in West Texas and eastern New Mexico. After hitting 4.13 million barrels per day, it fell last month down to 4.09. This month it's back up to 4.12 million barrels per day. Most expectations being for it to peak anywhere between 4.5 and 7 million barrels per day. My personal expectation being somewhere between 5.8 and 6.2. The Appalachia Shale, after jumping up again, has lost a tiny bit, falling from 31.86 billion cubic feet per day down to 31.74. The Haynesville Natural Gas Shale saw one of its biggest jumps ever, jumping up from 10.52 up to 11.07 billion cubic feet per day, with my personal expectation for Haynesville being that it's going to see its final peak somewhere between 12 and 13. Oil production from the Bakken Shale rebounded a little bit, from 1.37 up to 1.4 million barrels per day, as both the Bakken and Eagle Ford shales continue to lose and regain not as much, lose some more, regain not as much. Not quite plummeting yet, but sort of taking their dying, gasping breaths. Eagle Ford regained some as well, a very tiny bit, going back up from 1.422 up to 1.427 million barrels per day, and its natural gas production going up from 6.85 up to 6.88 billion cubic feet per day. The Niobrara Shale out of the base of the Rockies, losing oil production, dropping from 742 down to 738,000 barrels per day, and its natural gas output declining as well, dropping from 5.58 down to 5.54 billion cubic feet per day. And the Anadarko Shale in Oklahoma, losing oil production, but still gaining in natural gas production, dropping from 573 down to 554,000 barrels per day of oil production, while its natural gas output rose from 7.51 up to 7.55 billion cubic feet per day. And a few other assorted random things. Antimony, a little-known metal element, despite it having peaked in global production years ago and supplies still being on the decline, has continued decreasing in price and has now fallen below $6,000 per ton, primarily due to decreasing demand outpacing the decreasing supply, as its use in magnetic strips on things such as credit cards and the like is being replaced by other metals, and its use in flame-retardant chemicals and extinguishing agents is being replaced with various chemical compounds instead. And dysprosium, one of the rare earth elements necessary for electric motors and wind turbines as well, continues to rise in price, obviously from continuing increases in demand, primarily being driven at the moment from, you guessed it, rising electric vehicle production, now climbing as of this week from $248 up to $254 per kilogram. But for the moment, that's where everything's at. So that's it for this week, guys. I hope you all enjoyed. Don't forget to leave a like on the video if you did. Also continue to leave likes on everything over the course of the summer to increase the size of the pile of coal that I gather up. If you want to help support the channel or help me pay for my existence, links to PayPal, Patreon, Redbubble shop, everything's in the description down below, and I will see everybody around next time.